All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our final creativity camp session. This is creating a visual autobiography with Clare Szydlowski. And now I'm really excited to introduce you to Claire, aka Miss S, who is a high school teacher, and she creates really cool lesson plans. I really advise you guys to check out her teachers page, and I will put that link in the chat. But without further ado, I'm going to let Claire take over and introduce herself. Welcome, Claire. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shireen. So I'm gonna get started with sharing my screen, and we're gonna talk a little bit about this lesson that I have been teaching every year that I have taught digital art. So this lesson, I call it the visual autobiography. And for this presentation, what I'm going to do is kind of lead you through as if you were a student, but give you some insights to my thinking as an art educator. So whether you're a teacher or just learning Photoshop for the first time, I think you're going to get something out of this. And then at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about actually working in Photoshop. So I'll do a demo with Photoshop on so you can kind of see my process in the Photoshop window. So that's our plan. And so this lesson is called Visual Autobiography. The idea is that students are introducing themselves to the classroom community and the art community through a visual story. So it's not just kind of filling their silhouette with everything they like, but it's actually a visual narrative project. So they're coming up with a story they want to tell and really honing the way that they use images. So this project was actually inspired by one of my International Baccalaureate students' final pieces for his exhibition. And he's a really wonderful student, and I have his permission to share his image today with you guys. But I like to share this with my students and do something called visual thinking strategies, or VTS. You guys may be familiar with this. It's a great way to unpack complex imagery, and you can do it with any age group. So it's essentially 3 different questions. The first one is, what's going on in this picture? The second question is, what makes you say that? And that allows the student to kind of justify their description with some actual visual evidence from the piece. And then to kind of invite everybody back into finding more, what more can we find? And so the way I lead students through this is I usually have them look at this image silently on their own for at least 30 to 60 seconds, and then they can begin to discuss with a partner, and then we share with the group. And this really helps because I teach this like the first week of school, and students don't know each other, and it might be intimidating to speak with the whole group. So we're in a different kind of virtual classroom today, but I thought it would be fun. I'm going to open up the chat. If we could just unpack this image together a little bit, and you can kind of see what other people say. So you can open up your chat, make sure you click to everyone so that we can see what you're noticing. But what do you think is going on with this picture, and what makes you say that? So you can feel free to type. Doesn't have to be complete sentences, whatever you're noticing. So let's see if people have some ideas here. What is going on? What do you see?
I feel like we need elevator music while we wait. Don't be shy, everyone. Feel free
Yeah.
to drop what you're thinking in the chat.
Oh, yeah. So I'm seeing the word rescue here. Wildfire being put out, textures, negative space, war, maybe. Smoke indicating mental distress. So we're getting into metaphor here. Some people feel like there's a metaphor going on. Nature. Yes, there's lots of nature imagery in this piece. The environment, maybe it's even speaking to environmental issues. Help is on the way. I love that, Mary. That's awesome. Wildfires and their effects on physical and mental health. Yeah, I mean, wildfires are, it's almost wildfire season here where I am in the Pacific Northwest. Brainstorm, yes. So it's really interesting. Mind blown, pollution. Oh, so over here we see Kate is picking up on a brain scan, I don't know if you guys have noticed this. There is, if you look behind the wildfire, there is I believe it's an MRI scan. I could be wrong. I'm not very familiar with all the different scans, but it is the outline of a brain. So maybe it could be related to a brain injury. Excellent. And you can see this image is very visually rich. Protect Swiss with your ideas. Yes, it is a picture from Switzerland. So somebody's picking up on that. And that has to do with the student's story. So this is a very, visually rich image. And that's why I like to start out with it. And it's something that, that allows students to jump right in, and knowing that it's a student artwork and this isn't a professional artwork, I feel like has generated more conversation in my classroom. Students are more likely to give their idea of what could be going on without worries about it being wrong, because it's not like, oh, well, this is actually by Da Vinci and he was thinking this, and they might feel intimidated. So I do love to use student work when I can, and it's great. Obviously, you always want to get permission. And this student was, excited to have me share his work. So, and his story. So the story, and that's what I kind of tell students with VTS. It almost doesn't matter if you get the story right. It's not like, oh, did you get it right? It's just, can you tell a visual story that evokes ideas in people? Because in a museum, we're not there standing there explaining all our pieces. And sometimes it's fun to go to a museum and not read every little didactic. I feel like there is that part of art that can communicate to individuals, bringing their own experiences. And so I do like to share the story of the student, but I tell students whatever they came up with is not necessarily wrong, because images convey different things to different people based on their experiences. But it is intriguing to know what inspired this piece, because it is so visually and conceptually rich. So this student had an inoperable brain tumor from a very young age. And it wasn't cancerous or terminal, but it needed to be treated frequently. So this student would go through periods of treatment that were very difficult, and it would take it was a very personally challenging thing to go through these treatments. And he would feel weak for a while. And this student was an avid outdoorsman and had traveled the world. So this is the Swiss Alps in the background, and had mountaineering experience. And so he brought his love of mountaineering and the challenge of actually, summiting a mountain to this experience of the challenge of living with an inoperable brain tumor. So I thought that was a really beautiful connection between two really important things in this student's life. One that, is his choice, and one that isn't his choice in life. And that sparked this idea of a visual autobiography. Now, I always explain to my students, not everybody is going to share something so personal and so, heavy in a way, but it does show that we can tell really complex stories using imagery. And so that's what I'd like to kind of convey to my students, start them off with something that is very, high level, to inspire them. And it is fun for students to see that somebody their age is telling something personal through art, and maybe it can make them feel a little more courageous in their artwork. So the idea is to represent aspects of your experience, interests, life through layering of imagery and digital collage techniques. We talk a lot about what makes a compelling composition. I saw some people talking about things like texture and negative space and focal points. Those are very important parts of this lesson, and it's great you guys were picking up on that. And to have an opportunity to reflect on their experiences. Often students tell me, well, I don't have anything like that student going on in my life. I've never climbed the Swiss Alps. Like, what do I have to say? But every one of us has a story to tell. And I think a lot of students are surprised by, how deep of a story they're able to tell, even for something really simple. And it's a great way to introduce themselves. I find students are often most proud of this piece as we move through the course. This is a great way to build confidence early on, because these look very visually impressive. So I love to tell my students what we're going to cover ahead of time, and to let you guys know we cover a lot. I love project-based learning, which means, teaching skills and, nestled into a larger project, and we kind of learn as we go. Photoshop is so deep as a program and has so many elements, and we focus on some of the basics, just like how to adjust size and crop, how to understand DPI versus PPI and resolution and file sizes, selection tools, and how to create and save selections for future use in the file, creating layer masks. This is the most important part of the lesson. It's really a layer mask lesson. That's why we're going to do a demo on layer masks towards the end of this. We talk a lot about non-destructive editing and how can you use the Photoshop tools to not mess with your original image beyond being able to go back. So non-destructive editing is things like adjustment layers and layer masks, and working not with the original pixels, because once you edit those, you can't go back. And just basic stuff like how to manage all these layers, how to resize things with the transform tool, and then color adjustments, gradients, and backgrounds. We also talk a bit about copyright ethics, because there are those students who really gravitate towards using images found online. And so we want to be really careful about that and have a conversation about it. So, oops, there we go. So this is something else we can interact with here. And I like to tell students that when you get a prompt, whether you're a graphic designer or a writer or anything, maybe you get an essay from a teacher and they give you a word to inspire you. I love to start with the thesaurus. I've been doing this since, I don't know, one of my teachers told me to do this back in grade school or in middle school, and I still do this. I did it all throughout art school. If I got a prompt, I would go to Thesaurus and really take that word and spread it out and see if any of the other meanings of that word inspired me. And so this is just a kind of ideation strategy for students. And so I gave them the word visual autobiography. And so I just went into Thesaurus, took the word autobiography, and these are all the synonyms that came up. And so I tell my students to think about the ones that jump out at them, jot them in their sketchbook, and what kind of connotations, because a letter has a very different connotation than a confession. Adventures feels very different than memoir, right? And what's the tone of the kind of story you want to tell? And this is just kind of can be helpful as an entry point. So feel free to share in the chat any of the words that jump out at you and could be a good jumping off point for your visual autobiography.
And just a quick reminder to everybody, if you're sharing in the chat, please make sure to change it to everyone so everyone can see your great ideas.
Adventure, love it. Yeah. Yes, old photos, like torn edges. You can get all of that kind of look, or handwriting would be beautiful in this. You can totally scan like handwritten things. Life story memory, yes. Looking, I mean, you could even do something from when you were a child in this. It doesn't have to be a recent experience. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, memoir is so different than confession. I actually had a student last semester do one on confession, and it was so intriguing because she's a very positive, upbeat student. I've known her since freshman year, and she talked about like her darker side and some of the angst she experienced, but she doesn't ever reveal to people. And I thought that was really brave of her to create. And she said it felt really good to create the piece. It had like rain clouds and these like chain link fence, and it was not what I was expecting from her. But she loved that confession as a jumping off point. Yeah, places, sense. Yeah, you can even add this. You can add to this. But I think it's a great way to get students just starting to think about it, and yourself. A little tip. So from there, I typically have students do a mind map. Now they can start with that word, like I chose the word journal here, or they could just put me or my life or sense, like scent memories are so deep in our minds, so you could start with that. You could start with anything from the senses, sounds, sights, textures, and touch that you remember. So It really doesn't matter, but for students who are brand new to mind mapping, I always just kind of lead them through it very closely so that they don't have to overthink it. So from there, they can kind of, branch out. And for me, I started with journal and I was thinking kind of like daily routines. I'm someone who loves routines. I love to wake up super early. I try to watch the sunrise every day. If you follow me on Instagram, you probably see the sun rising over Mount Hood like every time I post it. And so that for me, like that daily pattern is super important. And then I put changes to routine. And we had this really huge ice storm this winter in my city, and we were pretty much shut down. I lost power for almost a week at my house, and it was pretty chaotic. So I chose for this demo to do the ice storm. And so what students would do is once they found an area, like this idea of a change to routine really intrigued me, I started highlighting everything I wanted to include. Some of the visual elements like the pink sky, being stuck inside, having candles. And so you can highlight those, and that can help you when you go to select your photos for this. Some other things you can do to help your students or help yourself as an artist coming up with ideas is to do some brainstorming and journaling with sentence starters. I have in my career often taught students who are learning English. Actually, all students in like where I teach are learning English, right? We're all learning English if that's the language you communicate in. But especially students who are new, maybe not native speakers, having sentence starters is so wonderful because it's a great way to dive in. And you can even have like fill in the blank sentences for students, and it gets them using that writing, journaling part of their mind. So I do always have sentence starters along with my lessons for students to really start thinking about how they can write along with coming up with ideas. So, okay, we're moving from that ideation phase. Actually, let's come back to double exposures. Oh, we'll keep going. Never mind. Okay, so the other thing that inspired this, and we'll go through kind of seeing how to gather images and stuff, but the other thing that inspired this lesson was multiple exposure photography. So, excuse me, this is something that's been going on since the late 1800s when photography was a new medium for documenting and producing art. And actually, what's really fascinating is there were several photographers. William Mumler was probably one of the most famous ones in the US who did what were called spirit photography. And so they would create double exposures and actually tell people that the images that were created from their double exposures were actually ghosts. And there's a famous one in the center. If you see that figure in the center one, that is Abraham Lincoln. And so this is a famous one that he created. And for years, people believed it was the ghost of Abraham Lincoln. So this is kind of an interesting connection to share with students, like the, kind of theatrical, history of this. And the Surrealists also experimented with this double exposure. And Surrealism is all about dreams and kind of like simultaneous experiences. And so students can get it inspired by the idea of surrealism. And a lot of these do look very surreal in the end. So there's a few different ways that this is done in the dark room. You can layer negatives and expose. And so you can see this artist is layering negatives and then they'll expose it in their enlarger. Or you can have a bunch of enlargers set up and you can move your paper and expose it multiple times. And you can have the negatives all laid out. If you are like me and you are a child of the 80s, you probably remember some accidental double exposures. This could be kind of fun to revisit in art, just thinking of this concept. If you had a 35mm camera and you took pictures and then you didn't take the film out and change it, and you just started taking pictures again, you would end up with these double exposures. And those are really intriguing images. So with Photoshop, this is actually a lot easier. We don't have to, layer negatives. We don't have to do multiple exposures with multiple enlargers. We can actually do this through layering imagery. and playing with layer opacity and things like that. So in all of my lessons, I like to share some professional artists that are doing similar techniques and for students to get inspired. But more importantly, I really want my students to feel like they're part of the larger conversation of art. As an artist, whether you're a student or you're a beginner, once you start creating, you are part of it. You are part of a conversation that has been going on since humans lived in caves and started drawing on the walls. Like, you're part of this huge conversation. And I like to show students that what they're doing is something that artists around the world are doing throughout time and history, and also right now, digital artists. The other reason I like to show these images is to show the different moods they convey through gesture, color, and things like that. So when students are getting ready to take their kind of portrait image that will anchor this project and be kind of the substrate to start layering image, they need to think about, what does it mean to lift your chin up or to put your chin down? What does it mean to, show yourself from the back, or maybe being covered with a hood? So we talk a lot about, what is the difference between gestures? Do we have this gesture that's very, well, actually, I'm trying to make this act. I'd love to hear from you guys. So yeah, if there's any ideas, what difference between these two gestures do you guys feel? We have the left and the right, or we could call it the yellow and the blue. What kind of moods do these evoke? Ooh, haughty versus depressed. I love that word, haughty. Defiant, that's another great word. Serene, contemplative, pensive. Ooh, these are very similar, but have a little bit different connotation. Cool. So, and it's also interesting to see that people read images differently. And, that's okay as artists. Like, we're not necessarily, it's not about getting the right answer. It's about conveying something and letting it out into the world, and people will take it how they take it. Nice, calm and solemn relief. Ooh, encumbered. That's really interesting. Yeah, this one on the right does feel pretty heavy. There's a heaviness versus a lightness. Free and locked. Wow, these are great words, guys. I love this. Excellent. So this is really fun to kind of, start to read images together. And I do this with a few different ones. The idea of obscuring the face versus not, what does it mean to look over the shoulder? And I also share with students that there could be accessories added to this. Like if you're telling a story about mountain biking, maybe you wear your helmet. You're skiing, maybe you wear your goggles. Maybe you wear a hat or glasses. Maybe you just wear glasses regularly, and that's a big part of your the way you move through the world. So I always encourage students, if they want to bring in things to photograph themselves at school, or if they want to take their photos at home, this is probably the most touchy point. If any of you work with high schoolers, you can commiserate in the chat, but getting high schoolers to take a photo of themselves or to use a photo of themselves is really challenging. There are those students who have no problem with it, and then there are students who agonize over this for whatever reason. There's a lot of reasons students might feel uncomfortable with using their face, but I really push this with students and work with them on it. And those who are so shy that they don't want to have their photo taken during class, because I usually say, okay, you can break off with a partner, go in the hallway, find a blank wall, and take portraits. And then some of the students, I say, if you feel really uncomfortable taking your portrait in class, or you have some prop or idea you want to do, you can do it at home. Just make sure you have it by next class. And then there are those students who are like, I absolutely don't want to use a photo of myself. So if that is what's going on, I usually talk to that student one-on-one and kind of figure out why they feel that way. I will often preview the project with them and show them examples where the face is like totally obscured. I mean, that first one was, and say, this is just a substrate. It's just a stencil. In the end, it's going to be covered up. So don't worry too much about it. Or I've even made kind of like appointments with students one-on-one where they'll come in the last like 10 minutes of lunch, and we'll just go to like the art office where it's quiet, and they'll stand in front of the wall, and I'll take a few photos and I'll sit with them and edit them and send it to them. So, I really think it's important to work with those students one-on-one, but to really encourage them, like, no, you can't use a photo, because they're like, can I use a celebrity? Can I use something from online? Can I use this or that? And I'm like, no, this is really important that it's you, because it's your story. So, yeah, those of you who, if you have any good suggestions for students who are really struggling with using their own photo, feel free to drop them in the chat. But I have found that I've had 100% success rate after working with kids one-on-one. They come around, and then they end up really liking their pieces. And students can be so creative. This one on the left with the hair, this student hung upside down. She laid on a couch and let her hair hang down and took a photo. So it looked like almost like troll doll hair standing up. I've had students who really didn't want their face, like this middle student. And I said, you don't necessarily have to show your face. Like, pull up this student had the hood pulled up all the time. And I said, like, you can take it with that hood. That's how you show up at this point in your life. That's fine. So just giving kids different options. And sometimes it really helps with the story. This student on the right actually went to Taiwan for a martial arts competition. And that was the story he was telling. And that flicking of the coin is kind of like, am I going to have luck in this competition? And so making sure to have that gesture was super important. So most students, I talk about the, kind of traditional portrait is like shoulders up. But if students want to do a full figure or not include their neck, like the one on the left, that's creative freedom. So definitely let students take it where they need to take it, but still adhering to, the major points and skills we're trying to learn. So students, if they're not taking their photos, they can also just look through their camera roll and start to gather images that relate to the story. So I find that is really helpful to just give them that kind of quiet time to start searching after their mind map. And this typically all happens the first day. We do these are all great ideas. That's right. So I'm reading the chat kind of too. But yeah, that first day we do the VTS, we do the mind map, and then we spend that time just kind of searching for images. So we don't even get right into Photoshop the first day. I also have, some pre-recorded tutorials for students ready to go. So if they do have their image right away and they're like, I want to get into Photoshop, like they can, but most of the students are just busy gathering things. And I tell them, if you don't take your picture in class or you don't find them in class, and you need to do that for homework, and you come next class and we're cooking with fire. You've got your images, you've got your portrait. So some students, they may have traveled. Like I had a student who went on safari and it was life-changing for her, but she didn't have any, really good images of the giraffe that she saw that she wanted to focus on. And she's like, can I please just look up a picture of a giraffe? And in that case, like, I think it's fine. But I think students should be really thoughtful about if they're going to use something from the internet, since this is a very personal project. So I'm pretty much a stickler about that. But there have been those students who, like, they want it to be about a musician they really like, and they want to use the album art. And I have to talk to them about how that album art is actually copyrighted and it's not appropriate to use. So how can you like convey the feeling of that album without using their album art? So I always direct students to Creative Commons licenses. Those are copyright-free images if they absolutely need an image. Or if you guys are familiar with this, this is my favorite website for copyright-free images. And the cool thing is you can actually like tip these people. These are some wonderful photographers from all over the world who contribute to Pexels. And you can even use these in things you sell. So like if you're doing graphic design, you can actually, and for a customer or something, you could actually use these images and sell that product. So it's pretty crazy. I love to tip these people. You can, shoot them a little $5 here, $10 there. It's really nice to do. Or just give them a review so that their pictures get boosted. So it's a really cool website. And then, oh, got distracted by the chat. There we go. Then we talk a little bit. I don't like to get into all the elements and principles of art. A lot of kids who take my digital art class are pretty new to art. and it does attract students who might be intimidated by traditional media, but are feeling like confident with using a computer. And I love that about this class. But I do like to kind of get into composition design a bit. So we really focus for this project mainly on this concept of contrast versus cohesion. So you kind of need both in your portrait for it to be interesting. You need contrast where you can think of focal points. Maybe it's a contrast of color, maybe it's hard edges like in this silhouette portrait, but something that is emphasizing an important area. If you think of back to that first one, it was probably that fire was that contrasting element and the way it bridged out of the head, and then that bright yellow helicopter. Those were some very high contrast elements. And then we have some more cohesive elements, whether they have like a cohesive color scheme or they're very close in tonal values, like these trees. We don't have like a ton of hard edges. We have a lot of soft edges. And so we spend some time looking at images and kind of talking in partner groups about contrast and cohesion. And then I typically have students return to this image where we talk about, well, what is dominant in this image and what is subordinate? And often students will point to, the fire, smoke, and the helicopter as dominant, and this brain scan is more subordinate because it's blending in. It's got that cohesion, that low contrast. It almost looks like the snow. And so it's hidden. So we talk about, well, what stands out? That's dominant. What's subordinate? That's more hidden. And so students really latch onto that. And I find that is a helpful way to talk. If we are kind of critiquing where they're going, I can say, oh, well, where can you add more contrast? Or where can you add more cohesion? And it really does help when you're giving feedback. So my digital classes are self-paced, and if you teach digital art, I highly recommend recording tutorials because students all work at different paces at different points in the project, and they can, oh, see you later. I see somebody's heading out. There will be a recording of this if you want to watch this later. So yeah, self-paced is very helpful. Students watch these tutorials, and then after they've watched the first like 3, where we talk about selections, we talk about or cropping and resizing selections, and then starting the layer mask process, I usually stop them and we do some in-process critique. This is super important because I don't know, having gone to art school, I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but I felt like critique at the end of a project was so silly because I'm like, well, I already made it. I'm not going to like remake my painting, that would have been great to know like halfway through. So I don't really do like critiques or feedback so much after as much as in the middle. And then I like to do reflections after, like, what did you learn and what can you apply to the next project? To me, that makes more sense. So let me know what you guys think of that idea in the chat, or if you do work in progress discussions. So typically I'll have most students will kind of get this idea of, cohesion, contrast, focal point, telling a story, but you will always end up with those students who, or maybe you feel this way too, where you just have a bunch of ideas and you throw them up at once and you get this kind of look where you just have a bunch of images kind of pushed together. And so having these mid project critiques or discussions and really training your students how to be constructive can be helpful. So this student just put everything he liked, and his story was so big and vast that it got kind of muddled. And through these really thoughtful and kind discussions, he was able to narrow it down and redo the project with more focus and less of these hard edge lines and just kind of boxes together. So I think it's really great to do it part way.
Claire, I
So,
want to jump in really quick. We
oh,
do have
sure.
a question.
Oh,
Um,
great.
what level/class do you teach this project with? You said IB, but is it a graphic art/design
Oh,
class
this
or a comprehensive 2D?
this is not IB. So the kid who inspired this was an IB student, which is a pretty high level art. This is typically ninth and 10th graders. I've had a
Gotcha.
couple 11th graders and like one senior take this class, but it's an intro to digital art. I also teach an advanced digital art. And so, yeah, it's mostly ninth graders and 10th graders with a few So if you're not in the US, that would be like 15 to 17-year-olds.
Gotcha. And then we have one more question in regards to the check-in on the student work. They ask, when you have midpoint critiques, do you have them print the work? Um, or or do you just display it on the screen? How do
Just
you
on
do
the
midpoint
screen.
critiques? Okay,
And
gotcha.
it's very intimidating to present in front of a whole class. So they just have like, I do appointment clocks. So they just get a little circle piece of paper and they have to meet with 4 people. So it'll be like 12, 3, 6, 9. And they write the kid's name next to that time on the clock. And so I'll say like, go to your 12 o'clock appointment. And that way they know who to meet with. And, so I would go and sit with a student and show them my files, show them my layers and kind of talk them through. And sometimes there's not time to meet with 4, so we'll just do 2 or 3. And then I usually walk around. And if there's a student who's already on my radar for not really understanding the idea that we're going for and are just have those random images together, I'll usually sit in kind of with that person and listen and then try to insert myself into the conversation a little bit to help it along. Like, well, this seems like a lot of ideas. Have you thought of narrowing it down and what that could do? Or and just try to kindly nudge because these are personal. So hopefully that answers your question, but we do keep it not like they're presenting in front of the whole class. I think that's way too much the first week. And when you're just learning, I don't want them to feel like they did something wrong necessarily, but I do want to guide them to have a more compelling image because that's our goal. So
That's awesome. As a past art student, I really appreciate the midpoint check-in approach because I was definitely in critiques and it was like how you said, like, well, I already finished this, so I don't know what you want me to do with it.
yeah, it's like, great, okay.
Yes.
So yeah, and it's great because with digital art, obviously, and non-destructive editing, they can always go back. And I feel like just really making that your classroom norm of there are no mistakes. We're just creating here is really great. So these are some really successful ones, just to kind of give you some inspiration here. I love the one of the gesture on the right. This student was very shy about doing this project, but he had a wonderful adventure in Alaska where it was very cold. And this gesture of kind of heating your hands, I found it so touching because all of us have experienced that where you kind of breathe into your hands. And the one on the left is kind of all about art and music. And this student actually put a fan so that her hair would blow out, which I thought was really clever. She took the photo at home. So all sorts, and you can kind of get a sense of these kids and their adventures. I tried to choose one where the faces are mostly obscured. There are kids who show more of their face, but for privacy sake, that's what I've chosen to share with you guys today. But just you can see students bring in a lot of interesting elements. Both of these students have backgrounds that kind of are part of the story or elements that go into the background, and that's totally okay. But I do try to tell students, be thoughtful of contrast. You don't want your silhouette to just blend into the background and disappear. Some students love the selections process and layer mask process, and they create multiple layer masks. When I'm kind of creating my rubric, it's kind of just making that one layer mask of their silhouette is what's required. But if they have other elements, like this student on the left did his hair as this kind of cloudy hair, and the shirt also had this positive, negative city look. So there's actually at least 3 layer masks, 3 different selections created rather. So they can create multiple selections and layer mask from that. It's basically, just digital collage, which is really cool. And they can make it as complex as they want. I also told students they can talk about inner worlds. Maybe your experience is an inner experience, and some of these are the most poetic. Um, the one on the right is just where music can take you, especially when you're feeling a lot of stress. And I know stress is a big thing for high school students. It is a stressful time in life, and students really resonate with the idea of like escaping an inner world, and that can be kind of metaphorical. Heritage and culture is beautiful to talk about. I love these are 2 that students really focused on their heritage and culture and their family's journey and their family's story. So just kind of thinking about directions students can go as an art teacher, you you can help kids generate ideas, especially if they're feeling like, I don't know what to talk about. You can ask them questions about, different aspects of their life to help get the ball rolling. As far as assessment, like I said, I don't like to do like critiquing. I'd like to do more celebrating at the end and reflecting. And so I do have students write their intentions, and they have to talk about two of their artistic choices and what those conveyed. So, whether it was a color they chose or an image they chose, what that tells about the story. And I provide a teacher example. And then I give them a Google slideshow where the text box are made, and they just need to take a screenshot and drop their photo in. Photoshop files are far too big to be dropped into Google slideshows. And so that's always a learning curve for students, teaching them the difference between, a working file and something like a PNG or JPEG. So they will put a screenshot and then they will write their intentions. I use a rubric to assess students on criteria, craft. Creativity for me is not like originality as much as innovation and experimentation. Did you experiment with the tools and techniques I taught you? You don't need to come up with the most original idea under the sun, but did you experiment? Did you push past what was demonstrated in the tutorials and do something, a little more with it? Did they actually work through the creative process? And that's where students show me for concept, I make note of, did they do a mind map? Did they actually journal or think about this? And then cooperation. This is where, like, if a student didn't return their Wacom tablet, or they didn't show up for the discussions, or they refused to talk to a partner, that's where you can give them some feedback on that, because that's important too. And then, of course, if you're teaching in the USA, we have our national core art standards. We're lucky as art teachers. I feel like our art standards are pretty awesome and right on. So I never have trouble fitting those in and making those available for students to see what they're actually learning in terms of the national core standards. I like to give them these virtual stickers. This is kind of silly. So once we make these slideshows, I have students share in a small group, their table group, like one at a time, their projects. But then, I teach like two to three sections of this. So I can teach, up to 60 students in this same lesson. And students probably know each other at school. So I have them add it to one big slideshow. That way they can see what their friends in another period made, and they can award them some stickers. These stickers have caused a little drama though, because kids are funny about them and want to copy and paste them a million times. If you teach high school, you probably get what I'm talking about, and they'll just like copy paste them till there's this whole like layer of them. So I have been very strict about like 3 max, like, and that way they mean something more. And if you get an award from someone, it actually means something. And then in addition to giving them the sticker, they need to explain why. So there is a comment feature on Google Slides. And so they can click that comment, like, it's personal expression because of this, or your color scheme is cohesive because of that. And so I monitor that pretty closely during that time that they're allowed to comment, and make sure that students are being appropriate. So this does not necessarily work for every classroom and every group of students, but it has worked for my students. The only thing they've struggled with is giving too many awards. So yeah, we're going to get into the demo part of this lesson today, and we're going to do some painterly editing of layer masks. And I think this is like the special sauce of this lesson. This is what makes it fun and artistic, and not just like, just layering images or letting the computer do the blending. This is actually using our tablets and like kind of painting in our blending. So, and you can take something that's a little, like, all these pictures had hard edges. This was a student who was very dedicated to basketball. So that dedication doesn't just look like the winning game. It's the getting up every morning and facing that basket and practicing. And I really loved how he even has like the morning clouds, because he gets up early to practice each day, or stays out late to practice each night. So thought that was really poetic. But you can see he did that nice blending, and it can take something that's a little more hard edge and make it soft. So we use for this blending part, a mouse is like adequate, but you're not going to get pressure sensitivity with like your trackpad. So the tablet is really ideal. I get these Intuos tablets. I like them because they have the pressure sensitivity. They're very precise and they're crazy durable. I've had the same ones for years and years, and kids are not like gentle with stuff. And other than having to replace some of the cords, and they do have Bluetooth, but I like the cords because we never know if kids' computers. It's bring your own device at my school, so I never know if kids' computers are gonna the Bluetooth is gonna work or what the network's gonna work. So the cords work for us. But I like to store them in dish racks. I just thought I'd pass that along. If you do have tablets in your classroom, dish racks are great because it keeps them upright, and I can turn them around and see all the numbers. I number them on the back. Okay, so I'm going to go into Photoshop.
Claire, while you're pulling up Photoshop, what tablet are you working on today?
I am working on the Wacom Intuos. So yeah, so I have one project that's quite complete just to kind of show you the layers, but I also have a project that is brand new, so I can kind of show you the steps. So here's my more complete kind of ice storm project. And you can see that I have layers labeled. I have some really subtle layers, like I have two of the same image. I have some adjustment layers. This is that non-destructive editing. And what's cool is students can decide, do I need to show? It has a very different mood if I turn these on and off. And so when students turn in their work, I typically have them, well, they always turn in a working file to me. And Google Classroom, that's what we use at my school, but I'm sure Canvas and some of these other content management systems can handle big files, but they give me the Photoshop file. And then in the slideshow that they share with everybody else, they share the version, the screenshot of the version they're like most proud of that they want to share. Because obviously there's some different versions. And I open the Photoshop file and I can see all the layers they've created, and I can see evidence that they have actually used all the skills. So I can see evidence of, for example, I'm going to turn off some of these layers. Like, did they create a selection like of their face? That is its own layer. Did they create that selection? Did they create layer masks? Did they edit the layer masks? I can see if they did that. Do they have adjustment layers? That sort of thing. And also sometimes students, what they're most proud of, that screenshot version, I think there's more interesting things going on in their file. Does that make sense? And I can kind of see all that they did and give them feedback and credit for all the work they did that might just not show up in the final product. So that's how I have them turn it in. Here is a new project just to kind of show you the process. It's super simple. So they have their photo, they have a plain background, and there's a bunch of selection tools. I don't have the students do the whole like beta version where you just say remove background, because it doesn't work. That essentially creates a layer mask instead of creating a selection. So they have to use the selection tools to be on the right layer to select the figure. And this object select is so precise these days. But for example, if students have like frizzy hair like I do, and they want to include more or less of it, they can go into, like the lasso or something and hold down option to remove things. Like I want to remove that pixel and not have it selected, that sort of thing. So I do teach that in my selections video that I record for them. And so they understand how to use all the selection tools, quick selection, magic wand, all of that stuff. But for our purposes today, this is perfectly good. And I'm going to go to select and save selection. So I'm going to save it with a name. And then the magic of all this is I can go to a new image like this. I'm going to deselect, pretend it's gone. So now I've loaded this mountain image. I can actually go to select, load selection, find my selection. I'll do the portrait new since that's the one we created together. And then I just hit my layer mask button. And whoa, I was on the wrong layer. Sorry, my bad. Whoops.
Claire, we have a quick clarifying question in the chat. They're saying
Sure.
students give you the PSD file via class via the classroom and then they screenshot the final and place it in a class slideshow?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and in my assignment in Google Classroom, I have the master slideshow, and I changed the permissions so everyone can edit it. And so as they're adding, they can see other people adding and things like that. But the PSD file just goes to me. And it is a little tedious because I have to like download them and click through them. But I don't really understand. I don't know how else I would actually assess their work, because especially nowadays with AI and everything, it's really important to actually see like what they did, did they use the skills? Yeah. So now we have a layer mask, and if I want to edit it, what I can do is I had this link. I'm going to unlink them, and I'm going to click just on the layer mask. And now if you look at the layer mask, everything that's blocked out is black, and everything that is open is white. So if I add more black to the white area, I'm blocking out more. So I can get a black paintbrush. I like to choose a very soft brush and sorry, I have to lower this down so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to lower the opacity a little bit, and then I can zoom in. And this is where I can use my tablet and pressure sensitivity, making sure I'm on that layer mask and I'm on that brush tool. And I can actually kind of like paint to reveal parts of the face, right? So let's see if I turn this one on.
We have another question while you're doing that.
Sure.
Have you ever had issues with students deleting/editing others' work in the class Google slide presentation?
I have not, but I think that's kind of like a classroom community thing, and just making sure you're building that trust. Because I feel like students haven't done stuff like that because they would feel badly about that. But I think you have to use your judgment and the group of students you're working with and how you built that classroom community. Because I could see that happening with, a student who really is seeking attention in that way, a student who has that kind of behavior issue that they're that student, they're really just crying out for attention, and this is how they know how to do it. um, but I haven't had that problem with this lesson, just because we've built it so slowly and personally. And honestly, I think showing that image in the beginning and kind of being like, we're humans, we go through stuff, and here's a kid who was going through something and told a story. I really do think that helps anchor it. And also just being having those partner critiques and turn and talk to a partner and building that trust. But I have had students misbehave with the stickers, for sure. I've had students go crazy with the stickers and like cover up the whole thing. I've had classes where I'm like, we're not doing stickers ever again because you're not mature enough to use them. So you do have to kind of feel it out. But no, I haven't had students do that. But I would feel it out. They can always just have just their image on their screen, and they can walk around and put a Post-it note on the table next to the computer. That's totally another way you could do it. They could just write it on a Post-it note and nobody's touching anybody's, right? So, I don't like when I see the teeth. There we go. So let's go back. That's kind of cool. So this is the painterly part. This is where you can really have fun with editing this and going through and, what can you make come through? What can you get rid of? If I want more of this tree to come through here, and you can really play with it. And that's sort of the fun part, is editing these by hand. Another thing you can do is play with blend modes and then edit. So there are these blend modes here where you see normal in the layers panel. And most of this lesson takes place in the layers panel, which I think is appropriate for a first lesson in Photoshop, because layers are, the foundation, in my opinion, the foundation of what Photoshop is doing, or any digital program. Even video programs and animation programs use layers. So let's say I wanted to do something like maybe that blend mode. I can still edit this layer mask with that blend mode going. So that's pretty interesting. Let's go back to this one here. And now I have, the eyes peeking out, and this is where it's getting very surreal. And the cool thing is students can really play, they can play with all of these elements. They can play with background. And this project is so visually impressive, but it's actually incredibly simple. And I think that's a great way to boost confidence in the beginning. So
Claire,
let
could
me,
students use text in this, or is this just purely imagery?
I have had some students use text. I tell them if they're going to use text, use it more as like a texture than like grabbing our attention, because we want to communicate. The whole point is it's a visual autobiography. So I have had students like you guys might remember the one with the girl with all the math equations or physics equations behind her. I have had students who were musicians and they had like musical notation. I've had students who there was one student who went to do a project for like Habitat for Humanity or something down in Latin America. And she kept a journal, like whatever program she was doing, had her keep a journal. And she had the pictures of the work she did and the people she met. And then she overlaid it with just kind of script from her daily journal, which I thought was beautiful. But it was more of a texture, if that makes sense, than
Awesome.
readable. Yeah.
And we have another question in the chat. How would you advise teachers to do this lesson if they do not have student work images to show like the ones you shared?
Um, So I think there's enough things online that you could put together. The artists I shared today for sure you can show. And I would recommend you make one yourself. And I would share something a little bit personal, maybe, I mean, not don't go overboard, obviously, but I would share something that's a little personal to you and your story. And I think that goes a long way with students in building trust. And so I would create your own and maybe even do the see, think, wonder with your own, and then have the experience of telling them what your inspiration was.
Okay, we have another question. Do you start with Photoshop first, then go to Illustrator? And they said, I usually do Illustrator for the first semester. Do you think this lesson could be done second semester? Would you do this?
Oh, yeah.
Or I'll let you answer the first part.
Yeah. I don't know if it matters if you start with Photoshop or Illustrator first. I start with Photoshop first because I find students are more familiar with Photoshop and maybe have used it before. And Illustrator with the vector, like the idea of drawing with math is a little more foreign, and the idea of pixels, just because like they already have so many video and photo editing on their phone. So they're familiar with things like filters and color adjustments, and all that stuff is in Photoshop. So for me, I always feel like it's a little bit more of a soft on ramp. But if it works for you, and I don't know, as kids get more and more savvy, a lot of kids have vector experience. So it's really up to you and what works for your students. But you can absolutely teach this as a second semester project, or whenever you do decide to start Photoshop, this could be the first lesson.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, or do you want me to demo anything else? Or, oh, that's very small. Let's see what else is on here.
If there are any other questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A and we'll ask Claire.
Any other? I don't think I'm crazy about that. Yeah, I also show students like if you have a little image, um, you can do some editing outside of the main file and bring it in. Not everything. I think sometimes with this lesson, students think like every selection must be a layer mask. And that's a little bit of a pitfall of this lesson that I've definitely experienced, where I'm like, no, not everything you select out needs to like be a layer mask. Something can just exist within your silhouette because it's smaller than your silhouette. And so I do have one of the tutorials is called like adding small elements. So, you can add this little element and this guy can just exist. And we can change the layer opacity and it can be more transparent. You can have a blend mode. It can look like that kind of thing.
So any of the videos that you create for your students, do you have those on YouTube?
I do. So I create the videos. I have a YouTube that's just for channel that's just for school, and it's for my students to access, and everything is shared privately through there. That way, I just don't want them interacting with like random people. And then I also post the YouTube tutorials to my Teacher Pay Teacher channel, like my personal channel, and they are private as well. And I just ask as part of my terms of use that if people purchase the lesson, that they don't share those links because they're like private links.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so that's kind of how I manage it because it's really nice when they can access it on the web and they're not like downloading a video file or I can do more editing too and post it. They can access it anywhere. Like sometimes students will, but I do have to tell students, please bring your headsets because there's nothing worse than hearing your own voice play out of multiple people's computers. Nothing more torturous. So I usually have a few loaner headsets, but that's one of the things they need to have for class is some kind of headset so that they can watch the tutorials.
Awesome. And Claire, can you hold up your Intuos one more time? We had somebody in the chat that was curious which tablet you're using.
So I'm
There
using,
it is.
it's the Intuos S, the small. They're just really compact. They work really well. And then when students when they really like this and they want to buy one, the medium or large is not much more money. And so usually students talk it out with me like, do you think I should get the medium? What do you think? And I'm like, if you just have a lot more real estate if you get the slightly bigger one. But this is also great. And I've had students who loved using this in class and put it on their Christmas wish list and things like that. And it's very durable. You can see I've got number 11 over here. This is literally from my classroom. So
Perfect. Thank you so much for showing that again.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Claire. This has been an awesome session. We had somebody saying in the chat that this is their favorite session so far of Creativity Camp. So thank you so much for that. And I hope all the other art teachers out there are able to bring this lesson to their classroom. And hopefully you can tag your students' artwork online. If they're using Wacom tablets, please feel free to use the Made with Wacom hashtag so we can see what your students have created. And if there's no other questions in the chat, oh, Tammy says Claire is the best.
Oh, thanks so much, Tammy. It's so great to see you on here.
So sweet. Thank you so much for attending, everyone. And before we go, I have one more thing to share with everybody. I just pull it up here. We do have a special discount going, 15% off using summer savings on the following Wacom products here. Feel free to take a screenshot of this now so you can take advantage of that saving. And thank you so much again to everybody that joined this session. Thank you if you came back from another Wacom Creativity Camp session. This was awesome, Claire. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much, Shireen. Thank you, everybody.